Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express-News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, opinion writer and columnist, and I'm joined by
Nancy Pryor-Johnson, Deputy Editorial Board Editor.
Metro Editor Greg Jefferson.
And before we get too deep into this episode, I wanted to mention that I have changed positions at the Express News. I've been a Metro columnist for the past 11 years, and beginning this week, I am now a member of the editorial board, joining Nancy and Carrie Clack and Josh Brodesky. I'm really, really happy about that. And I'll continue to do Sunday columns, and I'll be doing opinion writing, joining the rest of the team. So I got some very nice emails from readers over the weekend about that, and I really appreciate. I can't really put into words how much I appreciate people who read what we do and then share their thoughts about it. And we're really nothing without the without the readers, and thank you all for that and for listening to our podcast. We're recording this on Monday, October 9th, and today's the beginning of a special session in Texas. And there are a few issues that are in play, but I think the one that we're focusing the most on is school vouchers, which Governor Greg Abbott has made a big priority. And I think he's kind of staking his reputation right now on getting this passed. And we're really happy to be joined today by someone who's, I think, has a lot to say on this issue. Marisa Bono, who's the CEO of the Public Policy Research and Advocacy Group, Every Texan. Marisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Gilbert.
Well, this has really been something that's been pushed in Texas for a long time. There've been at least a segment of the Republican Party has been pushing this. I mean, the last three governors going back 29 years or so have all, with varying degrees of intensity, talked about wanting to pass voucher programs. And it feels now like Governor Abbott and his supporters on this issue are kind of holding school funding, public school funding, and teacher raises hostage to this voucher program, because we have not seen an increase in public school funding in 4 years, and they refuse to do it during the regular session. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's kind of complicating all of this. When you look at this issue, and I know it's one that you've thought about a lot and written about, I mean, what do you think that people miss when they talk about the issue of school vouchers?
I think, so vouchers usually comes up in a conversation where we all assume that our public school system is functioning and working the way that it should. So Texas, under our Constitution, has an obligation to provide what they say is an efficient system of public schools. Okay, right. And we do that through a school funding formula that's based on property taxes in Texas. And not unsimilar to other states, every district has a basic allotment that's based on attendance. So a lot of states do it that way, attendance or enrollment. Mm-hmm. And when we have this conversation about vouchers, I think there's this assumption that public schools are functioning the way that they should and are fully resourced the way that they should be to handle the business of educating our 5.5 million school students, school children in our public school system. And that simply isn't the case. So like you mentioned, the legislature hasn't even adjusted for inflation in about 4 years now. There hasn't been any new money in our school funding system, since 2010, 2011. And currently we spend about $4,000 less per student than the national average across the country.
We're in the bottom 10 of the
bottom
states,
10 right now, but I think we might even be in the bottom 5 at this point because a number of other states in their legislative sessions saw some increases over the course of the past year or two. And as a result, we're pouring hundreds of thousands of students into our workforce each year who are wholly unprepared for college and career. According to our own state standards, we're seeing mass school closures across the state. We've seen some of that right here in our community. And even before the pandemic, we're experiencing a massive teacher shortage because teachers haven't really had any change in their salary over the course of the past decade. So we're really sort of in the midst of a crisis. And the voucher proposal, when we're talking about a proposal that pulls money, pulls resources out of that system that's already struggling, I think that's the connection that people are kind of missing. Vouchers are like icing for a cake that the Texas legislature hasn't baked yet.
Mm-hmm. as you know, the issue is often defined by voucher supporters as one of school choice or parental empowerment. And if you frame it that way, and it's interesting to see the polling, because when you ask people, do they support parental choice or school choice, the reaction tends to be a lot more positive. And I don't think any of us, I think all of us who are parents like the idea of parental empowerment and school choice. But I think that it's a misnomer to characterize it this way. And I wondered, when you hear people talk, we do so many times, hear people define this as an issue of school choice. What do you think is deceptive about that?
Look, I mean, this is an emotional discourse. Like, it's a really emotional conversation. And I think there's a lot of name calling and a lot of accusation that people don't care about kids on both sides of the spectrum. And I think we all know that's not true, right? I think all Texans believe that all children should have access to a good education, regardless of where they live and where their income is. And I think that's why that phrase, school choice, has so much appeal. It appeals to that sensibility and that value that we have as Texans and as Americans. The problem is it's a total sham. It's a total scam. The phrase is a total scam because private schools are not obligated to accept any child, to serve any child, to keep any child. And their enrollment obviously is capped as well. We also have a lot of data from voucher programs from across the country. This is a program that's been implemented and expanded in a lot of different places across the country. And what we know is that a majority of voucher users were families who had kids who were already enrolled in private schools.
I was going to ask you about that because Arkansas is in the first year. You probably saw the report from the Arkansas Department of Education. They are in the first school year of a voucher program. I think they got about 5,000 kids there. And what amazed me was that 65% of the kids in that program were already in private schools.
Exactly.
So you're not really even if someone supports the concept, you're not really moving that many of the kids into that system. You're just providing the private institutions with public money,
right,
for kids that were already there,
or families that are already well off, a discount on tuition that they're already paying. So let's think about a working family with 2 kids, for example. School choice is more like a Sophie's choice because they got to decide which kid they're going to send. And even that being said, if you take the $8,000 proposed voucher and you want to send your child to TMI, the tuition's well over $23,000. How's a working class family going to come up with that difference? And so if we're serious about targeting resources and support for low-income families, students who need support with their schooling, there are a lot of different ways we can do that within our existing system. Plenty of experts and stakeholders across the state. Let's listen to the folks who are on the front line and come up with a comprehensive solution that actually serves kids and not these out-of-state interests that have been proliferating over the course of the past 10 years on the pro-voucher side.
I think when Governor Abbott talked to religious leaders, trying to get them to talk about it, I believe it's going to be on the 15th here. He wants them to talk about it in churches. And as I was listening to Governor Abbott talking about that, I just kept thinking, I just hope that they're paying attention and they know and that they can see through the sham that you're talking about. What do you think? I mean, have you gauged or has your organization done surveys on what people actually know?
Well, there have been a lot of surveys across the state around the voucher issue and also solutions related to supporting public schools. So Raise Your Hand Texas has kind of led the charge on a lot of those scientific studies. And we've got, like I said, a joint report with AFT from last year that talks about attitudes towards teachers and also the attitudes of teachers themselves. I think generally there's broad-based support for public schools, for the public school system, and for teachers, which is why it's so confusing that the public rhetoric has been more focused on tearing down public schools and also tearing down the important role and value of teachers. Like in order to make vouchers fly, you have to talk about all the things that don't work with our public schools when oddly it's something that Texans across the boards support. I mean, who doesn't love their community school? Who doesn't love their public school? My son, who's with us right now, he attends a local community school, and it's just the center of his world and the center of our family. And that's something that's going to be really hard to dissuade Texans on, which is why I think this bill or these proposals just fail over and over and over again.
Well, we saw in April there was a budget amendment passed by the Texas House, and which prohibited the use of public funds for vouchers, and you had 24 Republicans in the Texas House who voted for that. And you have Republicans in rural communities where there aren't these kind of private school options, where the public school, the public high school is the center of the community. Everyone goes to the public high school football games on Friday nights. And those Republicans, regardless of what the governor who represents their party is saying, don't necessarily want to see their school system endangered.
Well, yeah, it's one of the few things that we can still agree on, both Republicans and Democrats in this state. And that's exactly the reason why IDRA, a national nonprofit, but based here in San Antonio, they recently mapped out private schools that are available in rural areas across the state. It's a really cool little tool that it's available on their website. But you can, as you look across the state, it's not just discrete patches that don't have access to private school options. I mean, it's wide swaths of our state, and that's why I think a lot of Republicans just can't get on board, because they know what it's going to do to their schools, even under this immense pressure that's coming from the governor.
And their communities. I mean, I know I'm from Mathis, Texas, rural South Texas, and the biggest employer is the school district.
Yep.
So, if everybody goes, and even, I mean, there's no private school in Mathis, let's be real, but even if they start traveling, which I know they couldn't even afford that, a lot of people who live there, and leave that school district, it's going to decimate it.
There's a lot of criticism behind the emphasis over football over academics, right? But when you think about what those programs mean to communities, especially
Friday
in
Night
places.
Lights.
Oh, no, but that's what brings the community together.
Absolutely.
That's the heart and soul of the community. And so one misstep I think the governor made, there was a video he released of he's at a football game, but it was a football game at a private high school. And I was like, oh, no, you really stepped into it now.
Yes.
I mean, look, it doesn't have to be either or. That's the problem here. We're being forced into this zero-sum game where it's got to be either or. And hey, it does not have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. We had a $33 billion budget surplus this past session. I think the comptroller just announced an extra $3 billion from insurance premium taxes, a week or two ago. I mean, there's so many states that can't afford to have this conversation. We can. And instead, we're mucking around with this. I mean, it's essentially a political fundraiser for wealthy politicians.
So for several years now, we've been hearing a lot from Governor Abbott and Republican lawmakers about the teaching of critical race theory in public schools, dirty books in school libraries, and how they should be removed. Do you see this as was that preparing the ground for this push this year? I mean, it's really remarkable what's happening. And it does seem, I don't know. What do you think?
I don't think the push on the narrative that says public school teachers are indoctrinating our children, I don't think it's a coincidence that we saw that emerge in the same time that we had this orchestrated push for vouchers. That was not a coincidence. And, I don't want to sound too paranoid about it, but it's, you're not being paranoid if it's true. I mean, this is all part of a really, it was a very carefully well-planned strategy.
Purposeful. Yeah.
Because you need that little extra something.
Yeah.
This is, we're coming up to Halloween. This is like the zombie bill. It just keeps coming back and coming back. What are we going to do to give ourselves an edge this round and get this thing over the line? Well, it's this conversation around how public schools are bad and they're harmful for our children, and we don't know what's happening in the classroom, which is really ironic because private schools, if you want to talk about transparency in the classroom, no open records requests, you have no control, there's no oversight about what is or isn't happening in the classroom.
No curriculum, nothing.
And it's interesting because this past week, I think it was on Thursday and Friday, we had someone was sent by Accuracy in Media, a right-wing group, to the home of Phil Cortez, State Representative Phil Cortez, a Democrat, and his colleague Steve Allison, a Republican, who are both anti-voucher. And they had someone there in a truck, which was blasting out these sort of attacks on public schools, and mentioning critical race theory and so on. I think they went back to Steve Allison's house on Friday. So it does seem, like you said, it's not just school choice. It's school choice with this little extra thing that they put in, which is to now say that our kids are getting groomed or indoctrinated, and we need to save them and protect them and fund this transition into private schools.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to save and protect our kids, we need to listen to the people who are actually serving our kids, and that's the hundreds of thousands of teachers, superintendents across the state who know exactly what their kids need. That should be the source of our information, not out-of-state special interests.
Did you see the protests on Saturday?
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. We had Every Texan had folks there from all over the state, which actually was really impressive because we're in school right now. Yeah. So a lot of people said, hey, when this issue comes back up, it's going to be a lot. People aren't going to be paying attention because teachers are going to be in the classroom and
several hundred at least.
That missed the mark. Yeah, several hundred people crowded all around the Capitol on a holiday weekend. Yeah. So
I wanted to mention too some of the historical roots behind vouchers because I think they're important. And I'm not saying that everybody who supports vouchers now should necessarily be held responsible for all the thoughts of the people who supported vouchers historically. But I think it's important to understand where this issue comes from. And it really rose up in the 50s after the Brown versus Board decision, which desegregated public schools. And it was a response to that, which was let's try to help fund people moving their kids out of public schools because there were people who did not want to have integration in their schools. There's also been this sort of undercurrent of hostility to public schools, which when I was kind of looking into this issue a few months ago, I'd never seen this before. But in 2003, one of the many times that the Texas legislature has taken up the issue of vouchers, you had conservative economist Milton Friedman came to Austin and he spoke to the legislature in favor of a voucher program. And he referred to public schools as government schools, which I thought was a really interesting phrase. And this is coming from somebody who is hostile to big government. And he said, in reference to public schools, he said, like every socialist institution, you get low quality and high cost. And again, I'm not saying every single person who supports vouchers now believes that. But I think that if we look at the history of this issue and what's been driving it, there has been this undercurrent of hostility to the very concept of public education, which, as you said, the Texas Constitution mandates that the legislature needs to adequately fund public schools.
Yeah. That sentiment, that kind of low grade animosity, maybe not even so low grade anymore, that's new. That's a new feature in our system. So before I was at Every Texan, I was at MALDEF for many years. We did a lot of legislative work. So I've kind of seen this evolution. And I would say even 5 years ago, you would never hear a Republican decrying their public schools, decrying their school district, talking about a threat to children in public schools. That is something that I think has been introduced by what are largely these out-of-state influences. And then also being driven by that very core political constituency. But we have a massive system. I mean, we have 1,400 school districts. It's something in that order. this is not a perfect system.
Sure.
There are going to be inefficiencies. They're going to like, hey, I don't want to make this sound like some kind of panacea.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. Like this is the system that we're relying on to train our future workforce and to give every student the opportunity. And that access to that opportunity, that is something that is also in our Constitution. Yeah. The access to opportunity to engage in our economic and social life, right? There's language to that effect in the Constitution. And so so that resorting to name calling, like we're socialists or we're, hey, like you can do that. You're talking about giving an $8,000 voucher to every family in Texas. So like, hey, like you can make that argument on both sides, but it all detracts from the main issue here, which is we're in the middle of a crisis, a school funding crisis, and we need to be focused on the real problem here and not be distracted.
Yeah.
Is it me, or has the business community been awfully quiet about this? Because you would think that they've got to be concerned about having employees with basic skills who can do math, basic math, basic language skills.
Yeah, I will say I have not. I remember when there was like a question about curriculum, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, and I remember the business community being very loud and vocal about that. I have seen, I think I even saw the Hispanic Chamber had a statement that was anti-voucher, but I'm sorry, Hispanic Chamber, if I'm wrong on that. But I think I saw some kind of statement on that. But I would say you're right. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen as much of a presence there.
They're too quiet. They should speak up.
I don't.
It will affect them. It's going to affect our economy eventually. I mean, we're talking about educating and training our future.
Right.
And so to me, that's what speaks. I mean, the hypocrisy of it all is ridiculous.
Well, it's really, so the voucher program is one issue, but I think the larger issue is that we're not focused on preparing our students.
Yes.
We're like that's the big issue. So voucher, it's kind of like a red herring.
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of where you fall on vouchers, the big issue here is we're not addressing the main issue.
Yeah. You're going to leave them behind, and their schools are going to be even more underfunded, and they won't be able to meet their needs, and they're going to close more and more. It's going to be
it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. And we're seeing more school districts than ever across the state run deficit budgets, some for the first time this year.
Yeah. And then the issue is, too, this education system that we have, the Republicans created the system. They molded it, and they are in control. They've been in control for how many years? Decades.
The State Board of Education has been, not just conservative, but very conservative for many years now. If you don't like the curriculum in your public school, if you think that's indoctrinating your children, you should be talking to the Republicans who run our school system.
Exactly.
And
because it's fake, because it's not happening. I was a teacher just as recently as 3 years ago, and we didn't have time to indoctrinate students. Like, they're not teachers huddled up in a corner of a school building say, how are we going to indoctrinate these students today?
I will tell you what teachers have been busy with are trying to teach our children the ever increasing rigorous state standards. That's right. The rigor in our state academic standards have been ramping up over the course of the past 5 to 10 years, which is great, right? Mm-hmm. We want high standards for our kids. That's a good thing. The problem is the state is not also providing the equivalent funding to deliver that additional level of rigor. And so it's
or taking care of the teachers that are teaching them.
Well, exactly. Providing them the support they need. That's, the training that it takes to teach kids at that level, even in the elementary grades now, what they're expected to learn. I mean, my son just started sixth grade, and what he was learning in elementary school was, I feel like when I was like, I don't know, did I ever get that? I don't know. It's a completely different world than when I was in school. Yeah. And but then the other side of that is missing, which is increased supports for teachers and then smaller class sizes for kids, so they're better able to handle this heavy curriculum.
Exactly. Yeah.
Before we move on from this topic, I wanted to ask you about State Representative Barbara Gervin-Hawkins, who is all the Democrats in the San Antonio delegation are anti-voucher, but she has recently said, and she said this a few times, that if if the Republicans are basically going to demand vouchers in exchange for increased school funding and teacher pay, that she has suggested that she's open to maybe a 5-year pilot program and where we could assess how these vouchers or education savings accounts would work. What do you make of that as a strategy?
So you said strategy, and the first thing that comes into my head is like Sun Tzu, Art of War.
The Art of War.
And he says that you impose your will on your opponent. You don't let them impose their will on you.
Yeah.
And the rub here is that Republicans aren't clamoring for vouchers. There are many Republicans who would love nothing more than for this issue to go away and for them to never hear about it again. Yeah. They're in a real rock and a hard place, the pressure that they're facing from leaders like the governor and the lieutenant governor. And so to start waving the white flag before we're even at a place where we're quote unquote close to defeat, it's confusing. Yeah. But the representative is one member of our local delegation. She's one member in the House. I don't think that we should allow, one person to be driving a narrative. Sure. Instead, I think following the lead of folks who are calling for this closer focus on providing better supports and providing better funding and more targeted funding, I think that's a better reflection of values across the board, Republican or Democrat.
Before we wrap up things with this episode, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Medicaid, an issue which I know you've taken a close look at. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say we're in something of a Medicaid crisis in the state right now.
Another crisis.
And if you could talk a little bit, we were talking just before we started recording about the changes that have resulted in nearly 1 million Texans being kicked off of Medicaid. Can you talk a little bit about what how that happened?
Sure. Okay, so Medicaid is a state and federal run program that provides healthcare services for folks, predominantly the elderly and children. Millions of people in Texas have Medicaid, and it helps them cover healthcare costs. And we're talking about things like regular checkups and inhalers to catastrophic care if there's an accident or a chronic illness. Medicaid also covers some services that Medicare doesn't, like nursing home costs. All right. So that's what Medicaid means for the millions of Texans who use it. HHSC, the Health and Human Services Agency, is the agency in Texas that runs the program. Okay. And this is an agency that has always been underfunded, under-resourced, short-staffed. They're truly public servants. They do the best with what they have. But even before the pandemic, they were facing massive backlogs when it came to serving Texans. During the pandemic, the federal government decided to halt the process that checks people for their eligibility and make sure that they're re-enrolling on time. And post-pandemic announced that they were going to be getting rid of those rules. And that's what we refer to as Medicaid unwinding. Okay, so we knew this train was coming down the track. Spoiler alert, state leaders didn't do anything to make sure that the agency was properly staffed and resourced and prepared. Instead of using the full year, a 13-month period that the federal government allowed for states to handle this unwinding process, Texas tried to condense 4 to 5 million renewals within a 3 to 4 month period. And this was a system that was already backlogged and under-resourced. So not surprisingly, almost 1 million Texans up to this point have been booted off the Medicaid logs, even though it hasn't been established that they're not eligible. Okay, so these are folks who, a vast majority, are likely still eligible for the program, still need the program, mostly children and elderly folks and pregnant women or women who are postpartum. And now to get back on, they go back into the system that is already backlogged, right? They could be facing 5, 6, 7 month delays just to get back on, even though they're eligible. So this is really kind of a crisis of massive proportions for the state. We got to slow this down.
Yeah.
we got to slow this down. As it is, the governor without legislative authority can pause disenrollments and say, hey, let's just take a breather. Let's take a second and look at what we need to do here to adequately support the agency and space this out so that more Texans aren't harmed and get people who were wrongly booted off back on. We really got to take a breath here.
And that wouldn't take any kind of action on lawmakers, right? He could just do it.
He could do it today.
It doesn't even need to be part of a special session or anything like that.
Nope. Although it would have been nice if we're coming back anyway. It would have been nice to talk about, you know, what the legislature could do to help address this issue. Would have been nice, but not necessary. The government could pause, and with that direction, with that executive direction, the agency could also slow things down a little bit. That's where we're at.
And this is coming we're already in a climate where we're one of the few states in the country that has refused to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. And we had a major problem with uninsured people anyway. Yeah,
it's really confusing to me because we were just talking about vouchers. We're one of the few red states that haven't passed vouchers, and governor seems like chomping at the bit to get a voucher program. It's a real burr under his saddle, right?
Right.
But then virtually every other red state has expanded Medicaid. Why aren't we on this bandwagon? I don't understand. Right.
Yeah. Oh my God. Texas politics. Marisa Bono, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And to everyone listening in, thank you so much, and hope everything's going well for you. We'll be back next week. Take care.